The bread bowl on our kitchen table held 12 pounds of dough on a harvest morning, and I remember the weight of it exactly, because in the last week of my 8th month, I could no longer lift it from the table to the counter without setting it against my belly first. It was not yet 5 in the morning. The lamp was lit, the stove was already hot, and through the window I could hear the wagons coming up the lane, 12 men arriving hungry to cut our fields. And behind me, in the doorway, my husband stood with his hat already on, and he looked at me, and he looked at the bowl, and he said the sentence he always said, the one that was never once a question. The table will be ready when the men come in. I was 8 months and 1 week along. And I want to tell you what an Amish husband is permitted to ask of a wife in that condition, because the answer, where I come from, is everything, and no one will ever say so out loud. Before I go any further, my name is Sadie. I grew up old order, plain as plain gets, married at 19, and I left. This channel is where I say the things we were never allowed to say out loud, the truth about plain life from someone who lived inside of it, in a cap and an apron, for all those years. If that is the truth you have been looking for, subscribe and tap the like button so these stories find the people who need them. And tell me something in the comments before we go on, because I truly want to know. Did you believe, before tonight, that there was any limit at all to what a wife in her 9th month could be asked to do? I read every single one. Now let me explain what I mean, because to understand what happened in my kitchen that September, you have to understand a rule that you will never find written anywhere. In our districts, there is the Ordnung, the order, the great unwritten agreement about everything, the width of a hat brim, the color of a dress, the hour of milking. English people imagine it as a book of rules. It is not a book. It is a silence that everyone can read. And here is the thing about pregnancy inside that silence. It does not exist. I do not mean the babies do not come. Heaven knows they come, 6 and 8 and 10 to a house. I mean the condition itself is never spoken. There is no announcement. There is no month counted out loud. A woman is never once said to be expecting. At most, the older women might say she is that way, in a voice usually kept for weather. There is no special chair, no lighter chore list, no resting in the afternoon, because to make an exception for her body would be to say, out loud, in front of God and the district, that her body deserved an exception. And that is pride. That is the self lifting its head. And the whole engine of our life was Gelassenheit, the yielding, the giving way, the death of the self before the community. So follow the silence to its end, the way a girl raised in it learns to. If pregnancy is never spoken, then it is never weighed. If it is never weighed, then no work can be too heavy for it. And if no work can be too heavy, then a husband who asks a woman in her 8th month for the full harvest table, the full laundry, the full garden, the milking, the canning, the scrubbing of the church benches when it is her family's turn to host the service, that husband has broken no rule. There is no rule to break. What is not forbidden in words becomes permitted in practice. Nobody ever voted on it. Nobody had to. That is what the silence is for. And understand what enforces it, because it is not the men, not directly. It is the praise. In our world, a woman's work was her testimony. You were read by your garden, your wash line, your table, the way English people are read by their diplomas. A wash line full by 7 in the morning said more about your soul than anything you could ever testify at church. And the highest praise our world had for a woman, I heard it at funeral after funeral, standing in kitchens with casseroles, was some version of this. She never stopped. She cooked for the threshers the day before her 5th was born. She never once asked for help. Sit with that. The eulogy, the summary of a whole life before God, was that she never set her burden down, not even for her own body, not even at the end. Every girl in those kitchens heard it. I heard it at 9, at 11, at 14, holding a tray. Nobody ever told me that would be demanded of me. They did something far more thorough. They let me watch it be worshipped. I married at 19 in November in my mother's house on a Thursday. His name was Amish, and he was 23, and he had a farm already, which made him, and I will use the exact word my aunts used, a provision. I did not know him well. I knew him the way you know a man across 300 hymns, the back of his neck, his singing voice, the way he hitched a horse. At our wedding, the bishop preached on Gelassenheit, as bishops always do, 3 hours on the beauty of the yielded will, on the wife who gives way as the church gives way to Christ. And I sat there in my new blue dress with my hands folded and felt holy about it. God help me, I truly did. By spring, I was that way. 20 years old, married 5 months, and already learning that word's true grammar. Because Amish did not change one thing, not one. The garden stayed mine, a 1/4 acre, hoed by hand. The laundry stayed mine, for a farm household, wrung through a hand-cranked wringer and carried wet, basket by basket, to the line. The cooking stayed mine, 3 meals a day and pie besides, because a man standing in the district is measured partly at his table, and my table spoke for him. And when I grew heavy and slow, and my back took on that deep ache that lives where you cannot rub it, the work did not shrink to meet me. I shrank to meet the work. That is the arithmetic no one writes down. The house does not yield to the woman. The woman yields to the house. Gelassenheit. And then came September, and the harvest, and the morning I have already shown you. Cutting week is the biggest labor of the year. The neighbors come with their teams and their sons, and the farm that is being cut feeds them all. 12 men, 3 sittings a day, every day for most of a week. Bread, 2 meats, potatoes, gravy, beans, pickles, pie, a wedding's worth of cooking every single day, out of one woman's kitchen with a wood stove going in September heat. I was 8 months and 1 week. My hands had swollen so that I had moved my ring to a string around my neck, where no one could see it and ask. And on the second morning, the hired boy who did our milking was called home, and Amish stood in the doorway with his hat on and told me the cows were mine that week as well, before the baking, which meant 4:30 in the dark, a 3-legged stool, and a belly that no longer fit between me and the cow. Now here is the part I need you to hear, and I need you to hold on to it the whole way through, because it is the truest and the hardest thing I know about that life. Amish was not a cruel man. He did not raise his voice, not that morning, not ever. He would not have called what he asked of me a demand at all, and neither, God forgive me, would I have, not then. He asked it the way you ask water to boil. He had watched his own mother cook a cutting week to the day her pains began. Everyone had a mother like that, and every one of those mothers was praised for it at her funeral. That was the standard, and the standard was the demand. It did not need his voice. It had the district's voice. It had 300 years of voice. A man does not have to raise a hand or an eyebrow when the whole weight of a world says the table will be ready when the men come in. There is a part of this story I cannot tell you here. The part about the 3rd morning of that week, and the cows, and what happened in the barn before the sun came up. Not on this platform. There are rules here about what a voice like mine is allowed to describe, and I have learned exactly where the line sits. So I wrote it down instead, slowly, all of it, without the softening, without the parts cut out, everything the camera is not permitted to hear me say. It is a book now, and it is waiting in the very first pinned comment underneath this video. That is where the rest of that morning lives. But stay with me, because what I can tell you, what happened to my friend Rachel, is the part that finally opened my eyes. Rachel was my neighbor across the field, 3 years older, married the same November I was. Where my Amish was quiet, her Joseph was jolly, a laugher, a backslapper, a man everyone loved at auction. And Rachel worked her cutting week, the same as me, the same as everyone. Except Rachel's came in her 9th month, not her 8th. I carried pies over on the Thursday and found her standing at her stove with her eyes closed, just standing, the way a horse sleeps. I said her name twice before she heard it. She smiled at me. She had a beautiful, wide smile, Rachel. And she said the sentence that our whole world fit inside. It will keep until Sunday. Meaning the tiredness. Meaning the pains she was already having, little ones, coming and going. It will keep until Sunday. It did not keep until Sunday. I will not walk you through that night. The book holds it, because it deserves to be told whole or not at all. I will only tell you that there are 2 dates on one small stone in the graveyard of our district, and they are the same date, and that on the following church Sunday, Joseph stood up and thanked God for a wife who had never once set her own burden down. And the benches nodded. I nodded. 20 years old, 8 months along, and I sat on a backless bench and nodded at the thing that would be praised at my own funeral too, if I let it. It took me years to leave, that is its own story, told elsewhere, and I will not pretend the leaving was clean. You should know what it costs, because the cost is the fence that keeps the pasture full. When you go, you do not lose a church. You lose every person you have ever known all at once, by agreement. My letters home came back unopened, not angrily, just returned, the way you return a parcel misdelivered. When I telephoned the neighbor's phone shack and my own sister answered, there was a silence exactly as long as a held breath, and then the soft click of a person choosing the ordnung over her own blood, as she had been raised to, as I had once been raised to. I do not tell you this for pity. I tell you because you cannot understand why women stay standing at those stoves in their 9th month unless you understand what is strapped to the other side of the scale. It is not stubbornness that keeps a woman there. It is everyone she has ever loved. But the leaving had a beginning, and I can tell you the exact moment, because it began in an English clinic. By God's own irony, the midwife our district used sent me to town over my blood pressure. A nurse there, an English girl younger than me, looked at my chart and asked me a question no one had ever asked me in my life. She asked, "And how much are you resting?" And I laughed. I laughed, friends, because I did not have the faintest idea what she meant. Rest was a thing the ordnung gave you on the first day of your lying in and reclaimed within the fortnight. Years later, out and shunned, and sitting in a chair across from a counselor I could barely afford, I finally got the words for what I had been laughing at. She let me tell the whole thing, the bread bowl, the cows, Rachel, the stone with one date, and she did not gasp. She said quietly, "Sadie, do you hear that nobody in this story ever asked you? Not once. Nothing was ever asked. Everything was assumed." And then she gave me the 2 English words that our silence was built to keep out: consent, coercion, and she said the sentence I have carried like a coin ever since. The silence around a rule is not an accident of the system. The silence is the system. That is what I had lived in, not a cruel man. A world where the asking had been abolished so that no woman could ever be heard to say no, because she was never once, in her whole life, offered the shape of the question. So let me finish where the preachers never did. I have read that book too, the whole of it, in 2 languages, and there is no scripture, not one verse, not in Lancaster, not anywhere, that weighs a woman's faithfulness in loaves baked or rows hoed in her 8th month. There is no commandment that a table matters more than the body that sets it. That was never God. That was men and habit and a silence 300 years deep that found it useful to wear God's coat. And so, before I let you go, if you grew up in a world where your tiredness was ashamed to be hidden, I see you. If you have ever stood at a stove with your eyes closed, 8 months heavy, telling yourself it will keep until Sunday, I see you, and I am telling you now, it will not keep, and you are allowed to set it down today. And if nobody in your whole story ever asked you, if everything, always, was simply assumed, I see you most of all. You were never lazy. You were never proud. You were carrying a world that had quietly agreed never to carry you back. The version of this story I could not say out loud here, the third morning and Rachel's night, whole, is written down, all of it, and it is waiting for you in the very first pinned comment beneath this video. Thank you for sitting with me tonight. Guard your small freedoms, my friend. You never know which one of them is the door.